At exactly 3 in the morning, federal agents smashed through my bedroom door and dragged me barefoot across the frozen lawn in handcuffs. My daughter calmly recorded everything while my wife stood beside her in silence. At the station, the lead investigator opened my file, read 2 lines, then suddenly ordered, "Remove the cuffs. Now." The room fell silent as every face changed, and I realized someone had made a mistake. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we dive in, drop a quick comment. For me, have you ever had to choose between revenge and forgiveness, yes or no? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs today. Just a note, some details are fictionalized to highlight the lesson. What matters most is the message it carries. The heavy oak door to my bedroom exploded inward at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. Flashlights cut through the darkness like surgical blades. Voices shouted commands that crashed into one another until the words became pure noise. Hands grabbed my shoulders before I could fully process the sound of splintering wood yanking me upright from the bed where I had been lying awake waiting. Hands where we can see them on the ground now. I am Quincy Caldwell, 71 years old, a former senior forensic auditor who spent 3 decades hunting financial predators for the United States Treasury Department. My knees do not cooperate with sudden movements anymore. I'm 71 years old, I said quietly, raising my hands with deliberate slowness. My knees don't move that fast. They did not care. 2 agents grabbed my arms and forced me down onto the carpet with enough force to knock the air from my lungs. Cold metal handcuffs bit into my wrists. Someone pulled a black tactical jacket over my shoulders without bothering to let me put my arms through the sleeves properly. They hauled me to my feet and began pushing me toward the shattered doorway. The walk from my bedroom to the front door of my McLean mansion took less than 90 seconds. They felt like 90 years, barefoot. That detail bothered me more than the handcuffs. My bare feet touched cold granite floors, then colder tile, then the ice shock of dew-soaked grass as they paraded me across the front lawn. Red and blue lights strobed against the facade of my home, turning the white columns into a pulsing nightmare. Neighbors peered through silk curtains from their own multi-million-dollar estates, no doubt already composing text messages to their private group chats. Then I saw my family. My daughter, Zandra Caldwell, 40 years old, and a decorated white-collar defense attorney, stood beside a black SUV holding her phone up to record my arrest. A faint, satisfied smile touched the corner of her mouth. Not shock, not tears, not the devastated confusion a daughter should show watching federal agents drag her elderly father from his home in handcuffs at 3 in the morning. Satisfaction. Mercer Riddle, my 42-year-old son-in-law and a senior cybersecurity engineer, stood 5 feet behind her with his arms crossed tightly against his chest. He stared at the pavement, refusing to meet my eyes. His jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. My wife Inez, 56 years old, stood on the front porch with one hand covering her mouth. Her eyes were red but dry beneath the manufactured performance of shock. I had been married to her long enough to know the difference between genuine emotion and theater. None of them said a word as the agents shoved me into the back of an unmarked sedan. I had spent 30 years hunting financial predators for the United States Treasury Department. And now I was being treated like one. The IRS Criminal Investigation Field Office in Washington smelled like burnt coffee and institutional disinfect. They processed me in silence, fingerprints, photographs, property intake. The handcuffs stayed on. My bare feet left damp prints on the linoleum floor as they walked me down a corridor lined with identical gray doors, then pushed me into an interrogation room with walls the color of old newspapers. The lead agent introduced himself as Supervisory Special Agent Boyd Kemp. A weathered 52-year-old veteran of IRS criminal investigation with tired eyes filled with the cynical judgment of a man who thought he had already caught his wealthy white-collar criminal. "You're under federal arrest for wire fraud and money laundering," he said, dropping a thick folder onto the metal table between us. $8 million embezzled from a veterans charity over 18 months. Digital signature verification on 14 separate transactions. IP address traced directly to your home terminal. Offshore routing through Cayman accounts with your name on the beneficial ownership records. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. Bank statements, transaction logs, routing documentation. Each page represented hours of investigative work by people who believed they were pursuing justice. "You're looking at decades in a maximum security federal penitentiary." "Mr. Caldwell," Boyd continued, "but if you cooperate now, tell us where the money is and who else was involved, the prosecutor might consider reducing your sentence to something that lets you die outside a cage." I said nothing. I simply sat with my hands cuffed behind me, watching him perform his well-rehearsed routine. Boyd pulled out a laptop and opened it on the table. "Let me show you something," he said, turning the screen so I could see it. "A federal database interface. This is the automated anti-money laundering tracking system we use to cross-reference every financial crime in the United States. Watch what happens when I type your name." He entered my full legal name and social security number, then hit enter. The screen populated with results. Boyd started reading. Then he stopped reading. The color drained from his face like water from a broken glass. He stood abruptly, his chair screeching backward across the floor. "Remove the cuffs," he said to Agent Torres, one of the two uniformed officers guarding the door. His voice shook. "Right now." Agent Torres rushed forward, fumbling with keys to unlock my handcuffs. "Sir?" Torres asked, confused. "Just do it," Boyd snapped. The handcuffs fell away. I brought my hands forward, slowly rubbing my wrists where the metal had left red marks on my skin. Boyd sat back down heavily, staring at me with a completely new expression. The arrogant cynicism had been replaced by absolute terrified confusion. He swallowed hard, his throat clicking in the quiet room. "Mr. Caldwell." He began, his voice barely above a nervous whisper. "Your file shows you designed the automated anti-money laundering tracking software the entire federal government uses today. You personally wrote the algorithms that flag offshore routing patterns. You created the digital signature verification protocols we use in every financial fraud case." He gestured at the folder of evidence between us, his hand trembling slightly. "Why would a man with your expertise," he continued slowly, "a man who literally built the system we use to catch people doing exactly this, why would someone like you be framed for such a sloppy, amateur offshore wire fraud scheme?" I met his eyes and said nothing. The question hung in the air between us like smoke, because the answer required going back 3 months to the night I discovered that the 3 people I loved most in the world had decided I had lived long enough. I reached into my suit jacket pocket and pulled out my personal phone. Boyd watched the movement with the wary attention of a man who had just realized everything he thought he understood about this arrest had been wrong from the beginning. The interrogation room felt smaller now, the air thicker. I unlocked the phone with my thumbprint, bypassing 3 separate security protocols, and opened an application that did not exist in any commercial app store. The screen filled with a live video feed. "That's impossible," Boyd said quietly, leaning forward to stare at my phone screen. That's a live feed from your home study." The camera angle showed my leather desk chair, the mahogany desk with its 3 monitors, and the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves I had spent 30 years filling with forensic accounting textbooks and case law references. The timestamp in the corner confirmed the feed was active 4:12 a.m. current date streaming in real time from a camera hidden somewhere in my own home. Kicha, you've been surveilling your own house. Boyd's voice carried a note of disbelief that suggested he was rapidly recalculating every assumption he had made in the past hour. Not surveilling, I said. Watching. There's a difference. I set the phone on the metal table between us, screen facing up so Boyd could continue staring at the empty study. The monitors in the feed glowed with screensavers casting blue light across the vacant chair. I've been waiting for this exact conversation for 3 months, Agent Kemp. The words landed in the small room like stones dropped into still water. Boyd pulled his eyes away from the phone screen to look at me directly. 3 months, he repeated. 3 months, I confirmed. Waiting for federal agents to break down my bedroom door at 3 a.m. Waiting to be dragged barefoot across my front lawn in handcuffs. Waiting to sit in this specific chair in this specific room, having this specific conversation with whoever the Criminal Investigation Division sent to interrogate the wealthy white-collar criminal they believed they had caught. Boyd sat back in his chair. The metal legs scraped against the floor, a sound like fingernails on slate. You knew, he said slowly. You knew they were going to arrest you tonight. Then I knew they were going to arrest me eventually, I corrected. I engineered the circumstances to make the arrest inevitable. The timing was simply a matter of waiting for the right pieces to fall into place. I rubbed my wrists where the handcuffs had left red marks on my skin. The metal had been cold. The pressure had been real. Everything about this arrest had been genuine except for one critical detail I had wanted it to happen. Why? Boyd asked. The question was barely a whisper, because confronting a thief before you possess the complete map of their crimes only teaches them how to build better walls, I said. And because I needed you to discover my credentials organically, to read the file yourself, to see my history with Treasury, with the IRS, with the very systems you use every single day to prosecute financial criminals. I gestured at the laptop still open on the table between us, its screen displaying my service record in the federal anti-money laundering database. Which I needed you to ask yourself the exact question you asked 3 minutes ago. Why would a man who designed this system be framed for something this sloppy? Boyd stared at me. His jaw worked like he was chewing words he could not quite figure out how to speak aloud. You asked the right question. I continued. That's what I've been waiting for. Not the arrest, not the interrogation, not the handcuffs or the perp walk or my daughter filming my humiliation on her phone at 3 a.m. I was waiting for someone with institutional authority to look at this evidence and realize it doesn't make sense. How do you catch someone who thinks they've already won? You let them win. You let them celebrate. You let them make every move they plan to make, document every step, record every conversation. You wait until their victory is so complete, so thoroughly documented, that when you finally spring the trap, there is no argument. They can offer no lie sophisticated enough to explain away the evidence. Turn your laptop toward me, Agent Kemp, I said quietly. Let me show you who's actually going to federal prison before the sun comes up. Boyd hesitated. His hand moved toward the laptop, stopped, moved again. The war between procedural training and desperate curiosity played out across his weathered features in real time. Curiosity won. He rotated the laptop 180 degrees until the screen faced me. The anti-money laundering database interface waited its search field empty and ready. To understand why I'm sitting in this room at 4 a.m. looking calmer than you are, I said, my fingers hovering above the keyboard. We need to go back to the night everything began. I looked directly into Boyd Kemp's eyes and let a slow, deliberate breath escape my lungs. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the ventilation system humming through ceiling vents, could hear Boyd's slightly accelerated breathing, could hear my own heartbeat maintaining its steady, controlled rhythm. Exactly 3 months ago, I began my voice steady and cold. On a quiet Tuesday night in early September, I woke up at 2 in the morning with a dry throat. I walked down the hallway of my own home to get a glass of water from the kitchen. On my way back, I glanced into my study, just a casual glance, the kind you make 1,000 times without thinking. I paused, and I saw a USB drive on my desk that had moved exactly 2 millimeters to the left. Boyd's expression shifted from confusion to sharp focus. He understood what that meant. Any man who had spent 2 decades investigating financial crimes understood what it meant when objects in a locked study moved when they should have remained perfectly still. 2 millimeters, I repeated softly. Such a small distance. Most people would never notice. Most people would walk right past without a second thought. I leaned forward slightly. But I am not most people, Agent Kemp. I spent 30 years noticing things that other people miss. And that 2 millimeter shift told me someone had been in my locked study. Someone had touched my equipment. Someone had accessed my files. The words hung in the air between us. He's someone I trusted enough to give them keys to my home. But that discovery, the USB drive shifted 2 millimeters to the left, didn't happen in isolation. To understand what I saw that night, you need to understand what happened 3 days earlier. It was a Friday evening in late August. The 4 of us sat around the long walnut dining table beneath the crystal chandelier. The scent of roasted beef and rosemary filled the air. Xandra had been talking about a corporate lawsuit she'd won that week, something involving a pharmaceutical company and regulatory violations. She spoke with the controlled confidence of someone who had argued before federal judges and won. Mercer sat across from her drinking wine in silence. Inez smiled gently when Xandra talked about her legal victories. I was cutting into my beef when Xandra set her wine glass down with a soft clink. "You know, Dad," she said, her tone casual but with an edge I couldn't quite identify. "At some point you really should think about letting someone younger manage the properties. You're not getting any younger." I looked up from my plate. Xandra was watching me with an expression that seemed concerned on the surface, but felt cold underneath. "The properties are fine, sweetheart," I said evenly. "I've managed them for 12 years without issue. I'm just saying." She picked up her wine glass again, swirled it once. 71 is a lot." The words landed differently than they should have. Not with the gentle worry of a daughter concerned about her aging father's workload, but with the calculated assessment of an attorney evaluating an opponent's weakness. 71 is a lot. I smiled and changed the subject. But the words stayed with me through the rest of dinner, through Xandra and Mercer's departure at 9:30. They stayed with me as I climbed the stairs to bed, as I lay in the dark, listening to Inez's breathing beside me. 3 nights later, I woke at 2 in the morning with a dry throat. The second-floor hallway was dark, except for pale moonlight streaming through the tall window at the far end. I walked toward the stairs barefoot on the hardwood floor, thinking only about water and sleep. Then I saw the light, pale blue glow spilling from beneath my study door, a thin line of illumination where there should have been nothing but darkness. The study was supposed to be locked. The alarm was supposed to be active. Only I had the key, and only Inez knew the security code. I stood in the hallway for perhaps 10 seconds, my hand moving slowly to the brass doorknob. It turned easily, no resistance, no alarm. I pushed the door open. All 3 of them were inside. Xandra sat in my leather desk chair. Mercer stood directly behind her, his hands on the keyboard of my computer, typing rapidly with focused intensity. Inez stood beside them both, her eyes fixed on the glowing monitor. They turned toward me as 3 heads swiveling in perfect synchronization, 3 faces illuminated by the blue glow of my computer screen. "What are you doing in here?" I asked. My voice sounded calm. I was not calm. Dad. Xandra stood quickly, her hand going to her chest, in an exaggerated gesture of surprise. You startled us. We didn't want to wake you. Mercer's hands lifted from the keyboard. Inez took a small step backward. The alarm should have been active, I said, still standing in the doorway. How did you get in? I thought about the photograph on the kitchen shelf, Xandra at 6 years old, holding my hand in the backyard of our old house, laughing at something I'd said. The memory felt impossibly distant, like it belonged to someone else's life entirely. Xandra recovered her composure first. She always did. She walked across the study and wrapped one arm around my shoulders. We were setting up a charitable foundation in your name for your birthday, Dad. She said, her voice dropping into a softer register, the one she used when delivering difficult news to clients. You caught us red-handed. Mercer moved quickly, lifting a stack of papers from the desk and holding them up for my inspection. Printed forms, dense blocks of text, and official-looking letterhead. IRS tax exemption codes, Mercer said. You know how complex these federal filings can be. We needed access to some of your financial information to structure the foundation properly. Inez stepped forward and placed one hand on my chest, her eyes wide and innocent. We wanted it to be a surprise, she said softly. I stood there looking at the three of them, at their concerned faces and their careful explanations and their supporting documentation, and I read every single lie they were telling. She had learned to read body language from me sitting at this same desk 15 years ago, when she was studying for the bar exam. I had taught her how to identify deception in witness testimony by watching for micro-expressions and physiological tells. Now I used those same techniques to see through her performance with perfect clarity. Xandra's voice was pitched half an octave higher than her normal speaking tone, a classic stress indicator. Mercer's pupils were dilated in the dim light, baseline anxiety elevated beyond what the situation warranted. Inez was breathing shallowly from her chest, rather than her diaphragm, the pattern of someone actively managing their emotional state. They were lying, all three of them, in my locked study at 2 a.m, standing around my computer with fabricated documentation and rehearsed explanations. I let a warm, grateful smile spread across my tired face. That is incredibly thoughtful of you both. I said, my voice carrying exactly the right note of paternal appreciation. I'm truly touched. I apologize for interrupting. The relief that washed over their faces was almost beautiful in its transparency. I turned slowly and began to walk out of the study, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind me. But just before the door clicked into its frame, my eyes swept over the polished surface of my mahogany desk one last time, taking in every detail with the trained precision of someone who had spent 3 decades cataloging evidence. What I saw in that final glimpse would change everything. The harsh blue light from the monitor illuminated the top right corner of my mahogany desk, and I stopped breathing. My encrypted hardware security token sat exactly where I always kept it, parallel to the leather mousepad. Except it wasn't parallel anymore. The small black USB drive had shifted exactly 2 millimeters to the left. 2 millimeters. Most people would never notice such a small displacement. Most people don't spend 30 years cataloging evidence where the difference between genuine documents and forgeries comes down to microscopic details in ink density and paper fiber alignment. But what made my blood run cold wasn't the displacement itself. It was the tiny green LED on the metal side of the drive, blinking rapidly in the dim light. Not the slow, steady pulse that indicated standby mode. The rapid flutter that meant one thing: active data transfer. Massive throughput. Happening right now in real time while I stood frozen in the dark hallway with my hand still on the door handle. They hadn't come to set up a birthday charity. They had just stolen the digital keys to my entire financial life. The door clicked shut, with a sound like a gun hammer falling on an empty chamber. I stood in the hallway barefoot on the cold hardwood, my heart rate accelerating despite 3 decades of training in maintaining composure under pressure. That hardware token contained my master digital signature, my banking credentials, my property access codes, my encrypted file repositories. Everything a forensic auditor accumulates over 30 years of managing complex financial systems. Everything someone would need to impersonate me in every digital transaction that mattered. And the green LED kept blinking behind the closed door, transferring data I could no longer see or stop. I walked back to my bedroom, climbed into bed beside Inez, and lay on my back, staring at the dark ceiling. Sleep was impossible. Every muscle in my body screamed for immediate action, to throw open the study door, confront them, demand answers, call the authorities. But 30 years in federal service had taught me one undeniable lesson: confronting a thief without the complete map of their crimes only teaches them how to build better walls. I needed to know everything, every step they had taken, every file they had accessed, every transaction they planned to execute. Confronting them now in blind fury would only warn them that I knew. They would scatter, cover their tracks, lawyer up, claim innocence. I needed evidence, comprehensive, irrefutable, court-ready evidence. So I lay in the dark and forced my heart rate down from 90 beats per minute to 72, breathing slowly through my nose, using the same technique I had learned in Treasury training for maintaining composure during hostile witness interrogations. By the time gray dawn light began filtering through the curtains, I had made my decision. At 7:30, I walked downstairs and performed normalcy with the precision of a man who had spent 3 decades testifying in federal court. Good morning, sweetheart," I said to Inez, who stood at the kitchen counter preparing coffee. "Did you sleep well?" Very well," she said, turning to smile at me with perfect warmth. "Coffee, please." I sat at the breakfast table and opened the newspaper, scanning headlines. I didn't process my mind racing through the technical steps I would need to take. Inez set a steaming mug beside me. "The coffee is perfect as always," I said. "Any plans for today?" she asked. "I'm planning to review the September rental statements," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Nothing urgent." She nodded and returned to the counter, humming softly. The woman who had just helped steal my digital identity was humming while she prepared breakfast. I sipped the coffee and turned a page in the newspaper with steady hands. 2 days later, I descended into the basement utility room. The space was dusty and cramped, lit by a single flickering fluorescent tube that cast harsh shadows across the exposed pipes and electrical panels. The air smelled like concrete and old insulation. Behind the water heater hidden beneath a removable panel I had installed 4 years ago sat a phantom network node, a device that never appeared on standard wireless scans, invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. I had built it when I first moved into the house, a habit from decades of federal work, where maintaining an independent monitoring capability was simply good operational security. The node captured every packet of data flowing through the home network, logging everything to an encrypted drive. I connected my laptop and opened the command line interface, my fingers flying across the keyboard with muscle memory that had never faded. The terminal filled with raw routing logs, dense blocks of IP addresses and timestamps scrolling past in green monospace text. I filtered for the night of the intrusion. 2 a.m. early September. The results populated instantly. No IRS charity research. No federal tax exemption forms. Just an encrypted packet stream routed through 3 separate VPN servers terminating at a private banking server in the Cayman Islands. My jaw clenched. I expanded the time range, scrolling backward through the logs day by day, looking for the pattern's origin point. 1 week, 2 weeks, a month. While I was having dinner with her every Friday, while I was watching her laugh at the table, while I was telling myself everything was fine, she had been systematically mapping the architecture of my financial life. 2 months, 3 months. I kept scrolling. 4 months, 5 months. The terminal screen showed connection after connection, each one carefully timed for late-night hours, when I was asleep, each one extracting another layer of data from my systems. 6 months. I stared at the timestamp on the earliest log entry, March 23rd. Spring. Before summer. Before the contemptuous dinner comment about my age. Before anything that should have triggered this level of coordinated theft, Xandra had been inside my network since March, while I was having dinner with her every Friday, while I was proud of her career achievements, while I was telling colleagues my daughter was a brilliant white-collar defense attorney who made me proud. This wasn't a spontaneous crime of opportunity. This was systematic, planned, long-term. I stared at the terminal screen, my jaw tight watching the timestamp scroll backward through the logs. The intrusion didn't go back 3 months. It went back 6. Xandra had been inside my network since the spring, while I was having dinner with her every Friday, while I was proud of her career, while I was telling people my daughter was a brilliant attorney. She had been planning this longer than I could have imagined. I needed to know exactly which device inside my house had hosted the attack. 6 months of systematic infiltration meant someone had maintained persistent network access from within my own home. Not a single intrusion, not an opportunistic breach. A sustained operation requiring a dedicated connection point. I pulled up the raw packet logs again, filtering for the most recent connection timestamp. Every network device has a media access control address, a unique hardware identifier that functions like a fingerprint. Find the MAC address, find the device. I expected Xandra's laptop. She was the attorney, the one with the technical sophistication to coordinate a complex operation. Or possibly Mercer's rig, he was the cybersecurity engineer, the one who would understand VPN routing and encrypted channels. The query returned a single result. I stared at the 12-character hexadecimal string on my terminal screen, cross-referencing it against my internal network inventory. The MAC address belonged to a silver MacBook, the one Inez used daily on the kitchen counter to check news websites and email her book club friends. My wife's laptop. Inez hadn't just let them into my study that night. She hadn't just stood there watching while they worked. She had been actively hosting the secure connection, her device serving as the bridge between my compromised systems and whatever remote server they were using. I ran a deeper query expanding the timeline to capture all outbound connections from that specific MAC address over the past 6 months. The terminal filled with results, 14 separate connections, each one establishing an encrypted tunnel to the same destination a private server registered in Nassau, Bahamas. I pulled the server registration records. The name on the ownership documents made my blood run cold. Nolan Callahan. 5 years ago, I had spent 8 months building the federal case that dismantled his wire fraud syndicate. Nolan had been running a sophisticated identity theft operation, stealing credentials from elderly victims and draining their retirement accounts through a network of offshore shell companies. My testimony had been instrumental in securing his conviction. 22 years in federal prison followed by permanent deportation. And now my wife of 3 years was establishing regular secure connections to a server he controlled in Nassau. I thought about our wedding day 3 years ago, her smile as she walked down the aisle, her vows spoken with perfect sincerity, and the 14 times since then that she had opened a secure channel to a convicted criminal I had personally helped deport. I shut down the terminal and climbed the basement stairs, my legs feeling heavier with each step. The kitchen was empty. Inez had gone to her pottery class, the same Saturday routine she maintained every week. I walked to the front window and stood there for a long time, looking out at the quiet, tree-lined street, at the manicured lawns and the neighboring mansions, at the carefully constructed facade of wealth and normalcy. Then I heard the engine. The sound came first, a deep, aggressive roar that didn't belong in this neighborhood of sedans and luxury SUVs. I watched a pristine, slate-gray Porsche GT3 turn onto our street, its exhaust note echoing off the expensive homes like a violation of an unspoken covenant. Mercer parked on the cobblestones in front of the house. I walked outside, letting the screen door close softly behind me. The September air was warm, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and expensive automotive engineering. Quincy. Mercer stepped out of the car grinning with the enthusiasm of a man showing off a new toy. "What do you think? Beautiful machine," I said, walking down the front steps. "Must have cost a fortune in this economy." Got a deal on it," Mercer said, running his hand along the hood with obvious pride. "End of quarter clearance. Had to act fast." I walked slowly around the vehicle, taking in the details with the same methodical attention I had applied to financial documents for 4 decades. The car was immaculate. No dealership license plate frames. No temporary registration tags. Fully registered, fully legal, purchased clear. Approximately $230,000. Full cash. The market's been brutal." Quincy Mercer continued, his tone shifting to something more serious. "Major tech contracts canceled. I might need to tap you for a short-term loan soon, just to bridge the gap until things stabilize." I nodded, making a sympathetic sound, while my eyes continued their systematic scan of the vehicle. A struggling investment firm manager facing devastating losses does not authorize himself to drop $230,000 on a track-ready sports car bought with cash. The contradiction was so blatant, it bordered on insulting. Then I saw it. In the bottom corner of the passenger window, barely visible unless you were looking at the right angle, a small rectangular sticker. Custom shop logo. Miami Garage. High-end detailing and modification specialist. I knew that logo. 12 years ago, working a multi-agency task force targeting cartel money laundering operations in South Florida, my team had flagged that exact shop as a vehicle-based cash conversion point. The operation was elegant. Customers would walk in with duffel bags full of currency, purchase exotic cars at inflated prices using falsified documentation, then immediately resell the vehicles through legitimate channels. The cars themselves became the washing machine, transforming dirty cash into clean bank deposits. We had shut down that operation, sent 2 of the shop's owners to federal prison, seized 47 vehicles worth over $12 million. And here was my son-in-law, standing in my driveway beside a $250,000 sports car bearing that same shop's sticker, claiming he was financially struggling and might need a loan. "It's a remarkable vehicle," I said, my voice steady and warm. "You deserve something nice after all your hard work." Mercer smiled, relieved that I wasn't questioning the obvious contradiction between his claimed poverty and his extravagant purchase. We talked for another 10 minutes about horsepower and handling characteristics. Then he drove away, the Porsche's engine note fading down the quiet street until the neighborhood returned to its usual silence. I stood in the driveway long after he disappeared, staring at the empty space where the car had been parked. The garage sticker in that passenger window wasn't just suspicious, it was a signature. 12 years ago, my team had shut down that exact shop's laundering operation and sent 2 owners to federal prison. Mercer hadn't just bought a car with dirty money. He'd taken it straight to the one place that specialized in making stolen cash look legitimate. And that meant the conspiracy was far bigger than I'd imagined. I needed to disappear without actually leaving. A cartel-connected conspiracy involving my daughter, my wife, and my son-in-law required more than confrontation. It required comprehensive documentation, irrefutable evidence, and perfect timing. But to gather that evidence, I needed freedom to operate without their knowledge. Monday morning, I entered the kitchen with a deliberate, slow hitch in my stride, rubbing my lower back with one hand and my right knee with the other. I let my face tighten into convincing grimaces as I moved toward the coffee maker. Inez looked up from her tablet. "You're walking worse today." The autumn dampness is locking up my joints, I said, pouring coffee with movements slightly stiffer than necessary. My specialist strongly recommended an intensive 2-week retreat in Boca Raton, one of those medical wellness centers. That sounds wonderful, darling. Inez said, her voice carrying exactly the right note of wifely concern. You deserve some rest. The wellness center prohibits electronics. I continued, keeping my tone casual. Complete digital detox, part of the therapeutic protocol. I'll leave my laptop and phone in the safe. Inez's eyes flickered. A swift 0.3-second glance toward the hallway, checking if Xandra was within earshot. The micro-expression was so brief, an untrained observer would have missed it entirely. But I had spent 30 years cataloging exactly those kinds of tells in hostile witness interrogations. She was checking if her co-conspirator was listening before responding. When would you leave? She asked. Wednesday morning. The specialist said the sooner the better. I'll help you pack, Inez said, already turning back to her tablet. I turned my back to pour cream into my coffee. In the reflection of the kitchen window, I watched Inez's fingers move rapidly across her phone screen, typing an encrypted message to someone. Her thumbs flew across the keyboard with practiced speed, then she hit send and set the phone face down on the counter. I had taught Xandra how to read micro-expressions 15 years ago, when she was studying for the bar exam, sitting at my desk, going through witness testimony videos together. Now I was using those same skills to watch her stepmother coordinate my destruction in real time. I sipped my coffee and smiled. The coffee is perfect as always. Wednesday morning, I kissed Inez goodbye on the front steps, my luggage already loaded into the airport shuttle idling in the driveway. She hugged me with what seemed like genuine warmth, told me to enjoy the retreat, promised to water my office plants. The shuttle pulled away. I watched the McLean mansion shrink in the rear window until we turned the corner. "Excuse me," I said to the driver. "I need you to stop here." The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, confused. "Sir, we're only 4 blocks from your house. The airport is—" "I know, stop here, please." He pulled to the curb. I handed him $200 cash. "For your trouble," I said. "And for forgetting you ever picked me up." The driver looked at the bills, then at me, then back at the bills. He nodded slowly. I grabbed my single carry-on bag and stepped out onto the sidewalk in front of a nondescript, weathered brick apartment building. The shuttle pulled away, continuing toward the airport without me. I walked through the building's front entrance and down the hall to Unit 1C. The key turned smoothly in the lock. I had rented this ground-floor apartment 3 weeks ago using an untraceable corporate shell entity I had established during my Treasury years for exactly these kinds of situations. The space was sparse. Bare walls, cheap laminate floors, a single plastic folding table, 1 chair, heavy blackout curtains already drawn tight across the windows, and along the far wall, still in their boxes, thousands of dollars in high-grade tactical server equipment I had ordered piecemeal over the past 2 weeks. I set down my bag and got to work. 48 hours later, sustained by bitter black coffee and 4 hours of sleep, I had assembled a surveillance and monitoring network that would have made my old Treasury colleagues proud. 3 high-resolution monitors glowed in the darkness. Command line terminals scrolled with encrypted data streams. A blind routing mirror overlay on my home network installed remotely through back doors I had built into my own system years ago. I picked up my encrypted burner phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. "Marsden Gallagher," the voice answered on the second ring. Marsden Gallagher was a 45-year-old international asset recovery specialist with a reputation for ruthless precision. We had worked together dismantling cartel money networks in Miami a decade ago. He owed me a significant favor from a case where my testimony had kept his name out of a very ugly deposition. Marsden, it's Quincy Caldwell. A pause. Quincy. It's been a long time. I need a blind routing mirror and a pre-cleared FinCEN freeze, I said. I'm calling in that Miami favor. Another pause longer this time. What are we freezing? Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Connected to Nolan Callahan. Nolan Callahan. Marsden repeated slowly. The wire fraud case you testified on 5 years ago, I thought he was deported. He was. He's operating from Nassau now. I need MLAT clearance between U.S. and Cayman jurisdictions. How fast can you move? 5 to 7 business days if we start the paperwork today, Marsden said. What exactly are we freezing? I'll send you the account details within the hour. The freeze needs to be invisible, no alerts, no notifications. Just a silent quarantine. Understood. This is personal. Very. And then consider it done. I ended the call and turned back to the monitors. While I was setting up the surveillance overlay, I had placed a small framed photograph of my late wife Margaret on the corner of the plastic folding table. Margaret had died 4 years ago from cancer before I met Inez, before any of this darkness entered my home. In the photograph, she was smiling at something I had said during a vacation we took to Napa Valley 20 years ago. Her eyes were bright with laughter, her hand reaching toward the camera as if to push it away. Looking at her face now, I wondered if she had ever imagined the threat would come from inside my own house. I looked at Margaret's photograph. In the dim light of the safe house, her smile frozen in a moment 30 years past. She used to say that the problem with being very good at your job is that you start seeing threats everywhere. I set my coffee cup down on the plastic table and turned back to the glowing monitors. The trap was ready. Now I just had to wait for them to walk into it. And they would, because they thought I was 1,000 miles away. Over the next 72 hours, I built them a perfect trap, disguised as my entire financial life. The surveillance equipment hummed quietly in the dim safe house monitors, casting blue light across my face as I worked. Days 3 through 5 became a blur of command line interfaces and encrypted routing protocols. The honeypot had to be flawless, identical to my actual financial architecture, in every measurable way. I constructed mirror accounts that matched my real balances down to the penny. The same account structures, the same access paths, the same authentication sequences. I placed my digital signature tokens in the predictable directories where they had seen them before, in locations that would feel natural to someone who had already spent 6 months mapping my systems. But beneath the surface, I altered the international transfer protocols with surgical precision. The moment they deployed my stolen signature to authorize an outbound wire transfer, the command would cross a prearranged tripwire that Marsden had established with FinCEN. In federal forensic work, we call it a honeypot. You build something that looks exactly like what they want. Leave the door wide open, the lights on everything perfectly positioned, and then you lock it from the outside and wait. The funds would appear to clear their system. Green confirmation messages, success indicators, transaction completed. But the destination accounts would immediately fall under silent federal quarantine. A digital mirage they would never know was empty until federal agents came through their door. I tested the routing 17 times. Every simulation ran perfectly. On day 6, I executed the most dangerous part of the plan. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I left the safe house and drove back to McLean in a rental car I had paid for with cash. I parked 3 blocks away and approached my own home through the tree line behind the property, entering through the garage utility door I had deliberately left unlocked before my fake departure. The house was dark and silent. Inez slept upstairs. I could hear the faint sound of her breathing through the bedroom door as I moved past it with practiced silence, every footstep placed with the care of someone who had learned to walk through federal evidence rooms without disturbing dust patterns. My study door was closed but not locked. I pushed it open slowly, the hinges making no sound, because I had oiled them myself 2 years ago during routine maintenance. I mounted 3 pinhole camera lenses inside the ornate crown molding, left flank, right flank, and direct line of sight onto the primary monitor. Each lens was smaller than a shirt button, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. I tucked a high-gain microphone behind the base of the desk lamp, securing it with museum putty that would leave no residue. The Bait laptop sat exactly where I had left it, screen in standby mode positioned at a perfect angle for the cameras. I slipped out of the house just as the eastern sky began to lighten from black to deep blue. By the time I reached the safe house, dawn was breaking. That afternoon, I placed a call from a burner phone with a Florida area code. Inez answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello!" "Hi, sweetheart, just checking in," I said, letting my voice sound relaxed and exhausted in equal measure. "The retreat is exhausting but good. How's the weather there?" "Cold and rainy," she said. "How are you feeling?" Better. The therapies are intense. I'm completely unplugged here. It's peaceful. I'll call again in a few days. Take your time, darling. We're fine here. I love you too. I said the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. Take care of yourself. I ended the call and stared at the burner phone for a long time before setting it down on the plastic table. Days 8 through 10 passed in agonizing stillness. I slept on the folding cot, ate processed sandwiches from the corner bodega, drank tepid coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The monitors showed my empty study in infrared night vision, the desk, the chair, the glowing screensavers on the monitors all waiting in perfect stillness. During the quiet hours when waiting became unbearable, I began writing in a bound notebook. Unmailed letters to Xandra. I wrote about her first day of elementary school, how she had held my hand so tightly, her fingernails left crescent marks on my palm. I wrote about her university graduation speech, the way her voice had cracked with emotion when she thanked me for believing in her. I wrote about the night she passed the bar exam and called me at 11 p.m. weeping with joy, unable to form coherent sentences through the tears. I kept writing because it was the only thing keeping the grief from turning into something colder. I needed to remember why I loved her before I could accept what she had become. The letters filled page after page. Memories I couldn't let go. Moments that felt impossibly distant, like they belonged to someone else's life. A different father, a different daughter, a different family that had existed before betrayal carved through the center of everything we had been. I numbered each letter in the top right corner. By day 10, I had written 37 of them. They would never be sent. She would never read them. But I wrote them anyway, because the alternative was letting the surveillance footage and the federal evidence and the criminal conspiracy consume every memory I had of loving my daughter. On the 3rd night of waiting, exhausted and half asleep on the folding cot, the motion sensor on my primary monitor flashed red. I sat up straight, knocking over my coffee cup. Cold liquid spilled across the concrete floor. I didn't notice. On the screen, the door to my study swung slowly open. Xandra walked in first, her silhouette sharp against the hallway light behind her. Then Mercer carrying what looked like a laptop bag. Then Inez pulling the door shut behind her and turning the lock with a soft click I could hear through the high-gain microphone. The 3 of them stood in my study at 11:47 p.m., believing I was 1,000 miles away in Florida, completely unaware that 3 cameras were recording every movement in high definition and that every word they spoke was being captured by military-grade audio equipment. The trap was about to spring. I watched my son-in-law sit down in my leather chair and reach for the keyboard. The 3 monitors in the safe house showed the scene from different angles, left flank, right flank, center. The audio feed came through my headphones with perfect clarity. Every word, every keystroke, every breath. Mercer's fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced confidence. Xandra stood directly behind him, one hand resting on the back of the chair, watching the screen over his shoulder. Inez positioned herself at the door, her back against it, arms crossed, standing guard. On my diagnostic terminal, I pulled up the cloned network feed that mirrored every command Mercer executed. I watched him navigate through my file system, finding the honeypot gateway exactly where I had left it. The intentionally weakened firewall gave way after 3 attempts. He was good. Not good enough to recognize a trap, but technically proficient. And there, Zandra said, her voice sharp through the audio feed. That's the international routing directory. Mercer opened the file structure. The stolen cryptographic signature sat in a subdirectory labeled exactly as they would expect, based on 6 months of surveillance. He copied it, pasted it into the authentication field. On my screen, I watched the progress bar begin to fill. The wire transfer form populated with pre-configured data. Destination account in the Cayman Islands. Amount $8 million. Source my aggregated property liquidation accounts that they believed they had successfully accessed. Mercer's cursor hovered over the execute button. Do it, Zandra said quietly. He clicked. The system processed for exactly 7 seconds. Then the confirmation message appeared in green text, transfer authenticated. Transaction complete. Mercer leaned back in my chair, exhaling a long breath of relief. Zandra brought her hands together in silent, controlled applause. 3 measured claps, her expression cold and satisfied. Not the nervous relief of someone who had reluctantly participated in a crime. The calculated satisfaction of an architect watching her design execute flawlessly. She had planned this. All of it. From the beginning. Inez walked to the credenza on the far wall and pulled out a bottle of vintage champagne, the Dom Pérignon I had been saving for my 5th wedding anniversary, with her 3 months away. She peeled the foil, twisted the wire cage, and popped the cork with a soft sound that the microphone captured perfectly. She was pouring champagne into crystal glasses I had bought for our 2nd anniversary, celebrating with my wine in my study, sitting in my chair, drinking to the theft of my money. To new beginnings, Inez said, handing glasses to Zandra and Mercer. They touched the crystal together with a delicate clink. I sat in the dark safe house watching my family celebrate my destruction. My diagnostic terminal showed the trap had executed perfectly. The transaction had crossed the FinCEN tripwire, the funds were already under silent federal quarantine, and every detail of the transfer had been logged with timestamps and authentication trails that would hold up in any courtroom in America. But watching them drink champagne in my study, I felt no satisfaction. Only a profound emptiness that threatened to collapse into something darker. 30 minutes passed. They drank. They talked quietly about logistics I couldn't quite hear. Mercer checked the account balance on his phone, showing the screen to Zandra with visible relief. Then Inez's burner phone vibrated on the desk. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and activated speakerphone. "Is it done?" a gravelly voice asked. The voice filtered through my headphones with the slight delay and compression of an international satellite relay. I activated the IMSI tracker I had pre-staged on the network, capturing cellular metadata in real time. The gravelly voice filtering through the burner phone belonged to Nolan Callahan, a 52-year-old international criminal whose wire fraud syndicate I had personally dismantled 5 years ago, securing his conviction and deportation. Now he was orchestrating his revenge from somewhere beyond U.S. jurisdiction. Fictional. The transfer just cleared. Zandra said, her voice carrying the professional confidence she used in court. $8 million sitting in the holding account exactly as you instructed. Beautiful, Nolan's voice said. You'll have access to the Nassau Villa by Monday. Harbor view just like you wanted. And the other matter? Inez asked. The tracker on my screen completed its triangulation. GPS coordinates populated Nassau, Bahamas, a beachfront estate on the northeastern shore. I cross-referenced the location against known properties. It came back registered to a shell corporation with Nolan's signature financial patterns all over it. The other matter handles itself, Nolan said. Old men have accidents, especially old men with no family left to ask questions. Zandra's voice cut through the speaker, cold and final. He's lived long enough, Mercer. Men like him don't know when to step aside. My daughter said that. My Zandra. The girl I had read bedtime stories to every night until she was 12. The girl whose nightmares I had chased away. The girl whose law school tuition I had paid without hesitation, who had called me crying with joy the night she passed the bar exam. She had just declared that her father's existence was no longer necessary. Ah, the villa has everything you need, Nolan continued. By the time anyone notices he's gone, you'll be outside U.S. jurisdiction. Mercer's firm will go remote, Inez will be settled, and Zandra can practice law from anywhere. Clean start. When do we leave? Mercer asked. I give it 2 weeks. Let things settle, then disappear quietly. I'll have the travel documents ready. The call ended. Inez set the phone down on the desk. They finished their champagne in silence. I removed my headphones and set them on the plastic table. My hands were steady. My breathing was controlled. But something fundamental had broken inside my chest, something that would never repair itself no matter how much time passed. I closed my eyes for a single silent beat. Then I opened them and looked at Margaret's photograph, her smile frozen 30 years in the past. He's lived long enough. The girl I had taught to ride a bicycle. The girl who had held my hand at her mother Margaret's funeral. The girl I had loved unconditionally for 40 years. My daughter had just declared that her father's existence was no longer necessary. I picked up the headphones, and I went back to work, because now I knew exactly how deep the betrayal ran. I needed to know how long this had been planned. Hearing my daughter declare that I had lived long enough wasn't just a betrayal, it was evidence of premeditation. The distinction mattered in federal court. The difference between opportunistic theft and calculated conspiracy could mean decades of additional prison time. I picked up the encrypted phone and called Marsden Gallagher. He answered on the second ring. Quincy. Chief Marsden, I need a full forensic workup on Zandra's independent accounts, I said. Everything over the past 3 years. Personal accounts, business entities, limited liability companies, trusts, anything with her name or signature. What am I looking for? Connections to Nolan Callahan, financial transfers, structured payments, anything that shows coordination. A pause. How far back should I go? Start with 24 months. If you find anything, expand the timeline. I'll call you back in 2 hours. He called back in 90 minutes. Quincy Marsden said, his voice carrying a note I recognized from our days working together, the tone he used when evidence revealed something worse than we had anticipated. The structured transfers total $340,000 over 24 months. I sat forward in my chair, staring at the monitors. Say that again. $340,000. Moved from a shell entity registered in Nassau, traceable back to Nolan's known corporate patterns, into a limited liability company managed exclusively by Zandra. The transfers were carefully structured. None exceeded $9,000. All kept just below traditional automated anti-money laundering thresholds. 2 years. While I was having dinner with her every Friday, while I was proud of her legal victories, while I was telling colleagues my daughter was a brilliant white-collar defense attorney who made me proud, she had been receiving regular payments from the international criminal I had helped deport. Zandra wasn't a naive accessory, Marsden continued. She was actively compensated. The payment pattern suggests ongoing consultation, not a one-time recruitment. She was on Nolan's payroll for 2 full years before they executed the theft. She didn't stumble into this, I said quietly. She built it. That's my assessment, Marsden said. The timeline suggests she sought him out, not the other way around. Someone with her legal expertise would have known exactly who to contact for this kind of operation. I closed my eyes. 2 years of planning. 2 years of Friday dinners where she smiled at me across the table while coordinating with a deported felon to extract my wealth and eliminate me. 2 years of calculated deception performed with the skill I had taught her when I was training her to read hostile witnesses. "The FinCEN freeze," I said, opening my eyes. "Is it active?" "Fully operational as of 4 a.m. this morning," Marsden confirmed. "The Cayman Islands account that received your funds is now under silent quarantine. USA Patriot Act Section 314B authority. Explain the mechanism." "Nolan's digital dashboard shows normal green balance," Marsden said. "From his perspective, the money arrived exactly as expected. But any attempt to extract or redirect those assets triggers an immediate intercept. The funds divert into a secure federal escrow vault. He won't know it's frozen until he tries to move it. And when he tries, Treasury gets a real-time alert. We'll have his exact location, his routing instructions, his destination accounts. Everything we need to build an international wire fraud case." I nodded at the phone, even though Marsden couldn't see me. "What about Zandra?" "That's where it gets interesting," Marsden said. "The conspiracy charge under 18 U.S.C. Section 371 requires an overt act. Right now, we have communications, we have transfers, we have coordination. But for a definitive conviction, we need her to do something. Something specific." "She needs to sign something," Marsden said. "One document putting her name on that account officially. Corporate filings. Beneficial ownership claims. Legal documents asserting administrative authority. The moment she executes any formal paperwork claiming ownership or control of those funds, she completes the conspiracy charge. The moment she files the conspiracy charges are complete. You won't need a confession. You'll have something better, her signature." "She's an attorney," I said. "She'll want to formalize everything. Make it legal. Put her name on the corporate structure to protect herself from liability." "Exactly," Marsden said. "And the second she does, she's voluntarily providing prosecutors with a signed confession. An ironclad document entered into the official record showing she claimed ownership of funds explicitly flagged by FinCEN as proceeds from wire fraud and money laundering." I looked at the monitors showing my dark, empty study. The leather chair where Mercer had sat. The desk where they had celebrated with my champagne. The room where my daughter had declared I had lived long enough. "How long until the paperwork goes through normal channels?" I asked. "If she files next week, it processes within 5 to 7 business days," Marsden said. "But Quincy, there's something else you should know." "What?" "The federal prosecutor reviewing this case is going to want you on the record. Full deposition. Testimony about your relationship with Nolan, your relationship with Zandra, your knowledge of the conspiracy. You'll need to sit in a federal building and explain how your own daughter tried to have you killed." I said nothing for a long moment. "And I know," Marsden said quietly. "I'm sorry." Don't be," I said. "I'll do whatever the case requires." "The silent freeze is active," Marsden said. "Nolan sees green, but the vault is empty. Now we wait for her to sign." "She will," I said, looking at the monitors. "Zandra always finishes what she starts." I ended the call and set the phone down on the plastic table beside Margaret's photograph. The trap was set. The money was frozen under federal authority. The cameras were recording every movement in my study. The network logs documented every keystroke. Now all I needed was for my daughter to walk into federal court and claim ownership of a cartel account on the official record. And I knew exactly when she would do it. 48 hours before the raid would come. I made everything permanent. The safe house had served its purpose. The surveillance equipment had captured everything I needed. The honeypot had lured them into documenting their conspiracy with perfect clarity. Now I needed to ensure that even if they destroyed every piece of physical evidence in my home, the federal case would remain intact. I systematically compiled the definitive evidence package. 11 hours of high-definition video footage from the hidden study cameras. Clear faces, clear audio. Verbal confessions captured in their own words. Mercer executing the wire transfer. Zandra directing the operation with cold precision. Inez pulling out champagne to celebrate. The entire conspiracy documented from multiple camera angles with timestamps that would hold up in any courtroom. 3 months of comprehensive network logs from the honeypot, detailing every keystroke Mercer had executed, every file he had accessed, every command he had run. The digital fingerprints of the theft preserved in military-grade encrypted archives. Intercepted cellular metadata linking Inez directly to Nolan Callahan in Nassau. Precise GPS coordinates of his beachfront villa. Satellite relay patterns. Call duration records. Everything needed to prove international coordination, and the devastating 2-year financial ledger showing $340,000 in structured payments from Nolan's shell entities to Zandra's limited liability company. Proof that she hadn't been recruited, she had been compensated as the architect. I compressed the massive archive into a single encrypted package and uploaded it via a secure classified gateway directly into the internal servers of IRS Criminal Investigation. My status as a retained federal consultant, a courtesy extended to auditors who'd built the systems themselves, gave me a narrow monitored channel that would have taken a civilian months of paperwork to reach. The upload took 17 minutes. A green confirmation prompt flashed across the screen. Package received. Logged. Threat priority alpha. The evidence was permanently logged into the federal database, completely out of my hands and entirely immune to any physical destruction they might attempt. I powered down the tactical servers one by one, watching the monitors go dark. Then I ran a localized magnetic sweep across the temporary drives, wiping any digital residue that might remain. The safe house would be cleaned and vacated by morning, leaving no trace that I had ever been here. I stood in the empty room for a long moment, looking at Margaret's photograph on the corner of the plastic table. Then I picked it up, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and walked out. The night before the raid, I drove back to McLean. I kept the headlights off, parking 2 houses down from my own estate. The neighborhood was quiet, expensive homes, dark and still. I slipped through the side gate and entered through the secure utility door in the garage, the same entrance I had used when installing the cameras. The house was completely silent. Inez slept upstairs, unaware of my return. I moved through the familiar darkness with practiced silence past expensive imported furniture, illuminated only by moonlight filtering through tall, arched windows. Everything looked exactly as it had when I left 2 weeks ago for the fake Florida retreat. I walked to the study and stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at my leather chair. My desk, the monitors that had witnessed the conspiracy unfold. The pinhole cameras were still there, invisible in the crown, molding their recordings long since transmitted to federal servers. Then I walked to the living room. I poured myself a modest measure of bourbon from the crystal decanter on the sideboard. The amber liquid glowed faintly in the dim light, the scent of aged oak and vanilla rising as I lifted the glass. I took it to my favorite high-backed leather armchair positioned perfectly facing the front bay windows. The view showed the quiet street, the manicured lawn, and the oak tree I had planted 40 years ago, the year Zandra was born. It had survived 3 ice storms, 2 droughts, and 1 summer I thought we'd lost it for good. Now it was losing its last autumn leaves, bare branches reaching toward the December sky. I sat down in the armchair and took a slow, deliberate sip of bourbon, letting the warmth bloom in my chest. I thought about Margaret, who had died 4 years ago, never knowing that I would remarry or that my second wife would conspire to kill me. I thought about infant Xandra, the way she had grabbed my finger with her entire tiny hand the first time I held her. I thought about 30 years of federal service hunting financial predators, building cases that sent criminals to prison for decades. Now I had built one final case against my own family. The bourbon tasted exactly as it should, smooth, complex, expensive. I crossed my legs, rested my hands on the armrests, and simply waited in the suffocating silence. Somewhere in this house, Inez slept peacefully, believing I was still in Florida. Tomorrow morning, she would wake up and discover I had returned. She would see me sitting here, and within hours, she would make the phone call to Nolan that would trigger the federal response. I knew the sequence because I had designed it. Xandra would call the IRS Criminal Investigation tip line, claiming to have discovered her father's financial crimes. She would provide my address, my legal name details about offshore accounts and money laundering. She would perform concern and civic duty with the same skill she used in court. And federal agents would come. They would break down my door. They would put me in handcuffs. They would parade me across my front lawn in front of my neighbors and my family. Xandra would film it on her phone with that faint, satisfied smile. But what she wouldn't know, what none of them would know, was that I had uploaded the complete evidence package 48 hours ago. That every moment of their conspiracy was already logged in federal servers. That the money they believed they had stolen was frozen under federal authority. That the second Xandra signed documents claiming ownership of that account, she would complete the legal requirements for her own conviction. I took another slow sip of the bourbon, feeling its warmth settle into my bones. The night was perfectly still, the street outside empty and dark. In a few hours, the sun would rise. In a few hours, red and blue lights would paint this quiet neighborhood in chaos. In a few hours, my daughter would make the phone call that would send federal agents crashing through my door. I set the glass down on the side table, crossed my hands in my lap, and closed my eyes. I was ready. The wireless earpiece pressed cold against my ear as I sat in the dark den listening to my daughter dial the federal hotline. The clock read 1:30 a.m. I had moved from the living room an hour ago, positioning myself at the small desk where I could monitor the audio feed. The bourbon glass sat beside me, half empty. A single lamp cast dim light across the desktop. Through the earpiece, I heard the dial tone. Then the automated voice, IRS Criminal Investigation tip line. This call may be recorded. Xandra's breathing came through clearly. Measured. Controlled. A live voice. This is Special Agent Morrison, IRS Criminal Investigation. How can I help you? Xandra's voice trembled. My name is Xandra Caldwell. I'm calling because I accidentally discovered something on my father's computer. Financial records. I think he's been laundering money. The tremor was perfect. Not overdone. Just enough to suggest a daughter struggling with civic duty versus family loyalty. Can you provide more specific information? He's 71 years old. Lives at 4127 Oakmont Drive in McLean, Virginia. Quincy Caldwell. He used to work for Treasury, which is why I never thought. Her voice caught. A pause. Breathing through what sounded like tears. Take your time, Agent Morrison said. When I found offshore routing protocols, Cayman Islands accounts, digital signature files, the kind of setup you'd use to move money without detection. She was giving them everything. My address, my background. Technical details that would make the investigation urgent and credible. Is your father currently at this address? Yes. He just returned from Florida yesterday. And these financial crimes are ongoing. The most recent transfer was last week. I have screenshots. I can email them. I listened to my daughter build the case against me with the same precision I had taught her studying for the bar exam. Every detail calculated, every pause timed for maximum impact. "We'll need to verify this," Agent Morrison said. "But this warrants immediate investigation. Can you remain available for follow-up?" "Of course. I just need to know I did the right thing." "You did. Reporting financial crimes involving family takes courage." The call ended. I removed the earpiece and set it beside the bourbon glass. For a long moment, I sat in silence, staring at the framed photograph on the desk, Xandra at 8 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, grinning with pure, unguarded joy. I refilled my bourbon glass. The amber liquid caught the lamplight. Mid-story, CTA. Before I show you what happened next in that pre-dawn darkness, are you still with me? Comment A if you think Xandra will regret this moment, or B if you think she's too far gone to turn back, and add one reason in 5 to 10 words. Please note what follows contains recreated details for narrative purposes, meant to capture the emotional truth of that night. End mid-story, CTA. At 3 a.m., I heard the first siren. I set down the glass and walked upstairs to the master bedroom. Inez slept soundly, unaware I had returned from Florida, unaware federal agents were arriving. I climbed into bed fully clothed and lay on my back waiting. Red and blue lights hit the bedroom wall. Then came the heavy knock. The shouted commands. The splintering wood as they breached the door. I rose, slowly moving with the careful deliberation of a 71-year-old woken from sleep. Inez sat up, eyes wide with manufactured shock. "What's happening?" she asked, voice pitched to sound terrified. "I don't know," I said, though I knew exactly. Agent Torres appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 officers, the same agents who would soon deliver me into the hands of a man whose face would drain of color once he read my file. De Quincy Caldwell. "Yes." "You're under arrest for wire fraud and money laundering. Hands where we can see them." I raised my hands slowly. They put me in handcuffs and led me downstairs across granite floors, cold through my socks, out into the December air. The driveway was lit like a stage set. 3 federal vehicles, a dozen agents. And standing beside the black SUV exactly where I knew she would be, Xandra held up her phone to record. She wore the same expression I had seen in surveillance footage, faint satisfaction, carefully controlled. The smile of someone watching a plan execute flawlessly. Mercer stood behind her, arms crossed, staring at the pavement. He couldn't meet my eyes. Inez stood on the porch in her robe, one hand covering her mouth, eyes red but dry. The agents walked me across frost-crusted grass. My bare feet touched cold granite, then colder concrete. They opened the sedan's rear door. As they guided me toward the vehicle, I caught Xandra's eye. For perhaps 3 seconds, we looked at each other across 30 feet of flashing lights and federal officers and the wreckage of everything we had been. I saw something flicker in her expression. Not regret, not quite guilt, but uncertainty. The same uncertainty I had seen in hostile witnesses when they realized their story had holes. The doubt that comes when someone who believes they've been clever suspects they might have missed something crucial. She looked away first. That tiny movement, her eyes breaking contact before mine, told me everything. She wasn't certain. Despite 2 years of planning, despite Nolan's guidance, despite her legal training, some part of her recognized this moment didn't feel quite right. She had inherited my analytical mind. But she hadn't inherited my ability to follow a plan through without flinching. That uncertainty would be her undoing. The agents pushed me into the back seat and closed the door. Through the window, I watched Xandra lower her phone. She stood motionless as we pulled away from my house, toward the IRS Criminal Investigation Field Office, where everything would unravel. I pressed my thumb to the biometric scanner and unlocked the directory Agent Boyd Kemp had been trying to access for the past 20 minutes. That moment of uncertainty in Xandra's eyes when she looked away first had told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't ready for what was about to unfold, but I was. The IRSCI interrogation room was small and clinical. Boyd sat across from me at the metal table, his laptop open between us, his weathered face showing the cynical judgment of someone who believed he had caught another wealthy white-collar criminal. He had tried to access my service record to understand why a man with my background would commit such obvious fraud. The system had denied him. My retained consultant status meant only a narrow, monitored channel remained open to me. I unlocked it for him with a single thumbprint. "What is this?" Boyd asked, staring at the directory that appeared on his screen. "My insurance policy," I said. "Watch." I opened the first video file. The timestamp read, 3 weeks ago, 11:47 p.m. Boyd's eyes widened as the footage began playing high-definition video from 3 different camera angles showing my study. Mercer sitting in my leather chair. Zandra standing behind him, directing. Inez at the door, standing guard. "That's your study," Boyd said slowly. "You were recording them." "Hidden cameras installed 2 months ago," I said. "Crown molding, 3 lenses, high-gain microphone. Everything they said, everything they did, documented." The footage showed Mercer executing the wire transfer, the progress bar filling, the confirmation message appearing. Then Zandra's silent, controlled applause. Inez walking to the credenza and pulling out champagne. "My champagne," I said quietly. "The Dom Perignon I was saving for my wedding anniversary." Boyd leaned forward, watching as the 3 of them raised crystal glasses in a toast. The audio came through clearly, "To new beginnings." "Keep watching," I said. 30 minutes into the footage, Inez's burner phone rang. She activated speakerphone. The gravelly voice filtered through, "Is it done?" "The transfer just cleared," Zandra's voice said on the recording. 8 million sitting in the holding account exactly as you instructed. Boyd's jaw tightened. The voice on the phone continued. "You'll have access to the Nassau Villa by Monday. Harborview just like you wanted." Then Zandra said it. The words that would seal her conviction, "He's lived long enough, Mercer. Men like him don't know when to step aside." Boyd stopped the video. He sat back in his chair, processing what he had just witnessed. "How long have you been planning this, Mr. Caldwell?" he asked. "Since the moment I saw a USB drive move 2 millimeters to the left," I said. 3 months ago. That's when I knew." I watched Boyd's face as he absorbed the implications. The federal case had just shifted from simple wire fraud to something far darker: conspiracy, money laundering, international coordination with a deported felon, and family destruction documented in high definition. "The account they transferred to," I said. "It's a honeypot. Pre-cleared through FinCEN. The moment they executed that transfer, it crossed a federal tripwire. The funds are quarantined. They just don't know it yet." Boyd pulled up another window on his laptop, checking something in the federal database. His expression confirmed what I already knew. "The Cayman account is flagged," he said quietly. Silent freeze. "When did you set this up?" 2 weeks ago, through Marsden Gallagher International Asset Recovery. We used the USA Patriot Act Mutual Legal Assistance Protocols. "We have everything we need for arrest," Boyd said, reaching for his phone. I placed my hand on the table. "Don't." He looked at me, his hand hovering over the phone. "Don't," I repeated. "Immediate arrest gives you 18 months. Letter file, you get 20 years. You're asking me to let a suspect walk free," Boyd said. "So I'm asking you to wait 72 hours for her to complete the conspiracy." How many fathers architect their daughter's federal indictment with this level of surgical precision? How many sit in an interrogation room at 5 in the morning, teaching federal agents how to maximize her prison sentence? "Attempted wire fraud," I said. "That's what you have right now." She tried to steal my money. The transfer succeeded, but the funds are frozen. Defense attorney reduces it to 18 months, maybe 2 years, with good behavior. And if we wait, she's an attorney, I said. She believes in documentation. She'll want to formalize everything, protect herself legally. She'll file corporate documents claiming ownership of those funds. The moment she signs her name to any document asserting control over that account, you have her under 18 U.S.C. Section 1956 money laundering and 18 U.S.C. Section 371 conspiracy. Those aren't reducible charges. Those are 20-year mandatory minimums. The door to the interrogation room opened. Marsden Gallagher walked in carrying his briefcase. I had called him an hour ago before the agents arrived at my house. Agent Kemp Decum. Marsden said, setting his briefcase on the table. Marsden Gallagher International Asset Recovery. I've been coordinating with your office on the FinCEN freeze. Boyd nodded slowly. Mr. Caldwell was just explaining why we should delay arrest. His statutory analysis is flawless, Marsden said. The overt act requirement for conspiracy under Section 371 demands more than attempt. You need completion. The moment she files formal documents claiming those funds, she completes the conspiracy. You'll have a signed confession entered into federal court. Boyd looked between the two of us. You planned this? All of it, in every detail, I said. For 3 months. And you're certain she'll file? She's an attorney, I said. She believes filings are shields. Documentation is protection. She'll want everything legal, everything proper. She will sign. Boyd stood slowly walking to the window of the interrogation room. Dawn light was beginning to filter through the blinds. He stood there for a long moment, then turned back to face me. When do you expect her to file? I checked my watch. She'll be at her attorney desk in 3 hours. She's never missed a filing deadline in her life. Boyd picked up his phone and made a call. This is Kemp. Cancel the tactical deployment to the McLean address. We're holding position until further notice. He ended the call and looked at me. The trap is set, I said quietly. Now we wait for her to walk in and sign her own warrant. Zandra stepped before the cameras at 7 a.m., with no makeup, unstyled hair, and a performance 15 years in the making. The trap was set. Now we waited to see if she would walk into it exactly as I had predicted. I stood in a small conference room at the IRS Criminal Investigation Field Office watching the live news feed on a wall-mounted television. Boyd stood beside me holding a coffee cup. Marsden sat at the table with his laptop open, monitoring federal court filings in real time. The camera showed my McLean mansion driveway. 3 news vans, a cluster of reporters, and Zandra standing in front of the oak tree I had planted the year she was born, wearing a simple gray sweater, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Good morning, she said, her voice carrying just the right tremor of controlled emotion. My name is Zandra Caldwell. I'm a white-collar defense attorney, and I'm here to make a statement about my father. She paused, letting the moment build. Behind her, Mercer stood with his arms crossed. Inez held a tissue to her face. Yesterday morning, federal agents arrested my father, Quincy Caldwell, on charges of wire fraud and money laundering. Zandra continued. I never imagined my own father would be capable of such crimes. But when I accidentally discovered files on his computer, showing offshore accounts and illicit transfers, I knew my duty as an attorney and as a citizen. Her voice hitched perfectly on the word duty, not overdone, just enough to suggest the weight of her burden. Boyd glanced at me. She's good. She had an excellent teacher, I said quietly. On screen, Zandra was explaining how she had been helping her elderly father with routine computer maintenance when she stumbled upon evidence of financial crimes. The narrative was masterful, depicting her as a dutiful daughter caught between family loyalty and legal obligation, ultimately choosing justice. I've worked in white-collar criminal defense for 15 years. Zandra said, her voice stronger now. I know what it looks like when someone manipulates financial systems for personal gain. And I cannot in good conscience remain silent when I discover such manipulation, even when it involves my own father. She had integrated 15 years of litigation training, with 2 years of malice weaponizing her professional credibility to claim moral high ground over assets she had stolen. To protect the compromised funds and ensure they're properly restored to legitimate victims. Zandra continued, I'm filing an emergency federal injunction today. This injunction will place the affected accounts under custodial control of my law firm until federal investigators can complete their work and determine proper restitution. I set my coffee cup down on the conference table, watching my daughter perform with precision I recognized in every micro-expression, every calculated pause, every carefully chosen word. I was seeing myself reflected in her mastery of deception. The filing will be submitted to federal court within the hour, Zandra concluded. I understand this is difficult for my family, but some things matter more than family loyalty. Justice matters. Truth matters. Thank you. The press conference ended. Zandra turned and walked back toward the house, Mercer and Inez following. She just announced she's filing the injunction, Boyd said. Exactly as predicted, I said. She believes legal documentation protects her. She thinks claiming custodial control through official channels gives her legitimacy. When will the filing hit the system? Boyd asked. Marsden looked up from his laptop. Federal court e-filing system. If she submits within the hour, as she said, we'll see it by 8:30. We waited. I drank coffee. Boyd made phone calls, coordinating tactical teams. Marsden monitored the court database, his screen refreshing every 60 seconds. At 8:27 a.m. Marsden's laptop pinged. Filing received, he said, opening the document. Emergency federal injunction. Caldwell versus United States Department of Treasury. He scrolled through the pages. The legal language was dense, technical, perfectly formatted. Zandra had drafted a 40-page petition arguing that the funds in question, approximately $8 million currently under federal investigation, should be placed under the administrative control of her law firm to ensure proper victim restitution. And at the bottom, 3 signature blocks. Zandra Bennett Caldwell, Designated Administrator. Mercer Riddle, Chief Financial Officer, Caldwell Restitution Trust. Inez Caldwell, Attesting Witness. 3 signatures, Marsden said quietly. 3 federal defendants. Boyd leaned over to look at the screen. All claiming ownership of a cartel account. All on the record, I said. All under oath. All irrevocable. How many families destroy themselves with this level of documentary precision, each signature a testimony to betrayal recorded in federal ink? How many daughters sign their own arrest warrants while believing they're signing shields? Marsden pulled up a second window, cross-referencing the account numbers in Zandra's filing against the FinCEN database. The match appeared instantly. Account flagged, he said. Active cartel asset. Nassau registration. Beneficial owner listed as a shell corporation traced to Nolan Callahan. Your daughter just filed a federal document claiming administrative authority over funds explicitly identified by the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network as proceeds from wire fraud and money laundering. When that's the overt act, Boyd said slowly. The conspiracy charge is complete. 18 U.S.C. Section 371. Marsden confirmed. She didn't just attempt to claim the money. She formally asserted ownership in a sworn filing to a federal court. That's not attempt. That's completion. I stared at the signatures on the screen. Zandra's confident flourish, Mercer's corporate precision, Inez's careful script, all three of them claiming ownership of funds they had stolen from me, using credentials I had intentionally let them find, transferred to an account I had engineered specifically to trap them, flagged by federal agencies I had coordinated with months in advance. Marsden slid a printed copy of the injunction across the table to Boyd. 3 signatures visible at the bottom. Boyd looked at me. When do we move? I studied the document. My daughter's signature, my son-in-law's signature, my wife's signature. All 3 claiming ownership of $8 million flagged as cartel proceeds. No, I said quietly. We move now. The first ping arrived 30 minutes after Zandra signed the injunction, Nolan Callahan attempting to move $2 million he believed was safely hidden in Nassau. Boyd had just left to begin coordinating tactical teams when Marsden's laptop chimed. He pulled up the FinCEN monitoring interface, the screen filling with transaction data. Outbound transfer request. Marsden said, reading the display. Cayman account to a secondary Nassau holding account. $2 million. I moved to stand behind him, watching the screen. The transaction request showed Nolan's digital signature, his routing instructions, his destination account details. Is it intercepted? I asked. Watch, Marsden said. On his screen, the transaction processed for approximately 7 seconds. Then a green confirmation message appeared. Transfer complete. Funds delivered. But on a second window, Marsden had opened the actual FinCEN enforcement interface. The funds had been routed to a federal escrow vault. The destination account showed 0 balance increase. Nolan's interface was displaying false information, a mock success message generated by the quarantine protocols. He has no idea, I said. None, Marsden confirmed. His dashboard shows the money moved successfully, but it's sitting in federal custody. We watched for another 5 minutes, then a second ping. He's trying again, Marsden said. Another 2 million. Different routing path, same destination. The pattern repeated. 7 seconds of processing. Green confirmation. Funds diverted to federal escrow while Nolan's screen showed success. He's trying to move the money. 3 attempts in 12 minutes. Marsden said. Every attempt is another federal charge. I said. Watching Nolan's blind extraction attempts was like watching a surgeon operate on a cadaver, each precise movement, technically correct, but fundamentally futile. He believed he was executing a carefully planned extraction. He had no idea he was generating documentary evidence for his own indictment with every keystroke. A third ping. Marsden's screen flashed red this time. Third attempt triggers the high-priority alert. FinCEN just sent automatic notifications to FBI International Operations and Treasury Enforcement. I pulled out my phone and called Boyd. Kemp, he answered. Nolan's making his move, I said. 3 transfer attempts in the past 12 minutes, all intercepted. FinCEN has flagged him. I'll coordinate with FBI International, Boyd said. I heard him typing in the background. What's his location? Nassau. Same GPS coordinates as before. The beachfront villa. Royal Bahamas Police Force has a mutual assistance treaty with the U.S., Boyd said. I can have his passport restricted within the hour. I heard him speaking to someone else. Then he came back on the line. Royal Bahamas Police Force emergency passport restriction, yes. Nolan Callahan, 52 years old, convicted felon, deported 5 years ago. International arrest warrant pending. He ended that call and spoke to me again. He's not leaving Nassau. FBI will coordinate extradition once we have the domestic arrests completed. How long? 2 hours, Boyd said. Maybe less. I ended the call and sat back down at the conference table. Marsden continued monitoring the FinCEN interface, watching for any additional transfer attempts. None came. Nolan had apparently decided 3 attempts was sufficient, believing the funds were now safely distributed across multiple accounts he controlled. He had no idea every dollar was sitting in federal escrow, flagged with his digital signature, time-stamped with his attempted theft. Boyd returned to the conference room an hour later, carrying a tablet and 3 file folders. "Multi-agency coordination is complete," he said, setting the files on the table. IRSCI takes lead on the domestic conspiracy charges. FBI International handles Nolan and the Nassau operation. Treasury is freezing all auxiliary accounts linked to the co-conspirators. He opened the first folder. Zandra Caldwell. Arrest warrant for conspiracy to commit wire fraud money laundering under 18 U.S.C. Section 1956, conspiracy under 18 U.S.C. Section 371. Federal prosecutor is recommending no bail given international connections and flight risk. Second folder. Mercer Riddle. Same charges. Additional enhancement for using specialized technical expertise to facilitate the crimes. Third folder. Inez Caldwell. Conspiracy charges, material false statements, obstruction of justice. "3 domestic warrants, 1 international hold," Boyd said. Synchronized deployment at 1100 hours. My hands rested steady on the conference table, but watching the arrest protocols finalize. Watching my daughter's name typed into federal warrants, watching the tactical deployment timeline come together, I felt something crack in the careful control I had maintained for 3 months. "I need to be clear about something," I said. Boyd looked at me. "When you arrest Zandra," I said slowly, "read her every single right." "Twice." Boyd's expression shifted slightly. "Twice. Every single right," I repeated. "Miranda warnings, right to counsel, right to remain silent. Read them all. Then read them again. I don't want this thrown out on a technicality. I don't want a defense attorney claiming she wasn't properly informed. I want every procedural requirement met with absolute precision." The request revealed the father beneath the architect of revenge, the part of me that still needed to protect her, even while ensuring her conviction. If she was going to federal prison, it would be because the case was perfect, not because it was sloppy. Boyd studied my face for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Understood," he said. He gathered the folders and his tablet, preparing to leave for the tactical briefing. "One more thing," I said. "I want confirmation when it's done. All 3 in custody. I need to know." "You'll know," Boyd said. He stood at the door, arrest warrants in hand, looking back at me sitting motionless at the conference table. 1100 hours, he said. Then he left. I looked at the clock on the conference room wall. 10:17 a.m. 43 minutes until federal tactical teams would arrive at 3 separate locations. 43 minutes until Zandra walked into her law office and found agents waiting. Until Mercer opened his investment firm door to badges and handcuffs. Until Inez answered the doorbell at my McLean estate and faced the consequences of 18 months coordinating with a deported felon. 43 minutes until my daughter, my wife, and my son-in-law faced simultaneous federal arrest for crimes I had engineered them to commit. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat in the quiet conference room, watching the minutes count down toward 1100 hours. Boyd slid the photograph across the metal table in interrogation room B, and I watched Inez's face collapse as she recognized Nolan with his other mistress. 1100 hours had come and gone. The arrests had been executed with military precision. Now I stood in the observation room, watching through one-way glass as the interrogations began. 3 rooms, 3 conspirators, all separated, all being told that the others were already cooperating. In room B, Inez stared at the photograph Boyd had placed before her. high resolution, full color, pulled from public social media 3 days ago. Nolan Callahan stood on a Nassau beach with his arm around a woman in her 30s, blonde, tanned, smiling at the camera. The caption was visible in the printout, "Paradise with my love." Posted 3 weeks ago. Boyd said, his voice calm through the speaker. Public account. Tagged location, Nassau Paradise Club. Inez's fingers trembled as she touched the edge of the photograph. "He said," she whispered, "he said we'd go together." "You were never part of his exit plan, Mrs. Caldwell," Boyd said. "The Nassau villa was never for you. The relocation was never for you. You were a useful contact inside the house, that's all." I watched Inez process the photograph this woman Nolan had been with, while coordinating his conspiracy with my wife, while promising her a future together, while using her laptop to establish encrypted channels into my network. Watching her recognize the specific devastation of realizing your co-conspirator never valued you beyond utility, I felt immense fatigue rather than triumph. This wasn't victory. This was family destruction documented in federal ink. "I have the communication logs between you and Mr. Callahan," Boyd continued. 14 secure connections over 6 months. Every message, every instruction, every coordination meeting. Inez looked up at him, her eyes red. "What do you want?" she asked. "The truth," Boyd said. "Full cooperation. Every detail of how this conspiracy was organized. Who recruited you, when it started, what you were promised." Inez nodded slowly. "I want a sentencing recommendation. That can be arranged," Boyd said. "But I need everything." "I'll give you everything," Inez said quietly. In interrogation room, a Mercer was already talking. I had been watching his interview on a second monitor. He had lasted approximately 6 minutes before fracturing completely. "I just handled the technical side," Mercer said, his hands shaking as he spoke. "Zandra designed everything, the routing protocols, the offshore accounts, the timeline. I just executed what she told me to do." "You're a senior cybersecurity engineer," the interrogating agent said. "You understood exactly what you were building." "I understood the technical parameters," Mercer said. "I didn't understand the criminal framework. Zandra told me it was legal. She's an attorney. I trusted her professional judgment." He was shifting total culpability to Zandra claiming ignorance, despite 2 years of active participation. The defense wouldn't hold up in court, but watching him try revealed how quickly the conspiracy was fracturing under pressure. 3 interrogation rooms. 3 fractures occurring at different speeds, like watching identical structural failures in slow motion, fast motion, and frozen frame. In room C, Zandra remained defiant. I shifted my attention to the 3rd monitor. She sat perfectly still in her chair, hands folded on the metal table, expression controlled. The attorney who had spent 15 years in courtrooms, trained to project confidence even when the case was collapsing. "Your husband is cooperating," the agent told her. "He's providing detailed testimony about your role in organizing the conspiracy." "My husband is lying to save himself," Zandra said calmly. "And you can't use spousal testimony in federal court without my consent." "We don't need his testimony," the agent said. "We have the surveillance footage." Zandra's expression didn't change, but I saw her fingers tighten slightly on the table. "Surveillance footage of what?" she asked. "Your study," the agent said. "Hidden cameras, 3 angles, high-definition video, complete audio. Every moment of your conspiracy documented and time-stamped." That's illegal," Zandra said immediately. "Warrantless surveillance in a private residence violates the 4th Amendment. Any evidence obtained..." "Your father installed the cameras," the agent interrupted. "In his own study, in his own home. No warrant required when the property owner conducts surveillance of his own property. Zandra went very still. "Let me show you something," the agent said. He activated a monitor on the wall. The screen came to life, showing my study from the center camera angle. The footage was dated 3 weeks ago. Mercer sat in my leather chair executing the wire transfer. Zandra stood behind him, directing, Inez at the door. The agent let it play for 30 seconds, then paused it. "We have 11 hours of footage," he said. "Every meeting, every conversation, every moment of coordination." Zandra stared at the frozen image on the screen. "My husband manipulated me into," she began. The agent reactivated the monitor. The audio came through clearly, Zandra's voice from the speakers. "He's lived long enough, Mercer. Men like him don't know when to step aside." The footage continued. The champagne celebration. Inez pouring glasses. The toast. Zandra's voice again, "To inheritance long overdue." Then her laugh cold and satisfied, as the three of them celebrated my destruction. The agent stopped the playback. Zandra sat motionless, staring at the black screen. For the first time all day, she had no legal argument to offer. No defense strategy. No procedural objection. She was looking at her own reflection in the dark monitor, seeing herself captured on federal surveillance equipment, hearing her own voice declare her father's life expendable, watching herself toast to inheritance she believed was rightfully hers. "The estate should have been mine years ago," her recorded voice had said on another clip the agent had ready. "He's lived long enough." Boyd stepped into the observation room beside me. "All three are giving statements," he said quietly. "Mercer's blaming Zandra. Inez is providing communication logs with Nolan. Zandra just heard herself on surveillance audio." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "They're turning on each other," Boyd continued. "Classic conspiracy collapse. Each one trying to minimize their own culpability by maximizing the others." On the monitor, Zandra continued to stare at the black screen. The agent sat across from her, waiting for her response. She said nothing. For the first time in 15 years of legal practice, my daughter had run out of words. Marsden slid the evidence index across the conference table. 11 hours of high-definition video, 3 months of network logs, 2 years of financial documentation, and every defense attorney in the room went silent. Zandra had run out of words in the interrogation room. Now her legal team was discovering they had run out of defenses. The conference room at the IRS Criminal Investigation Field Office was crowded. Boyd sat at one end of the table, Marsden beside him with his laptop open. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Holt, the senior federal prosecutor handling the case, sat across from 3 defense attorneys representing Zandra, Mercer, and Inez. I stood against the back wall, an observer in the final formalization of everything I had built. Comprehensive Surveillance Archive, Marsden said, opening the first file on his laptop and projecting it onto the wall screen. Formally entered as Exhibit A through K. 11 hours of high-definition video with synchronized audio from 3 camera angles. Complete coverage of the conspiracy, from initial coordination through execution. The screen showed my study, the leather chair, the desk. Zandra directing Mercer through the wire transfer. 3 months of comprehensive network logs. Marsden continued advancing to the next exhibit. Every keystroke, every file access, every command executed, time-stamped and authenticated. He clicked through the remaining exhibits. Cellular intercepts showing Inez's communications with Nolan. GPS tracking data from Nassau pinpointing Nolan's exact location. The 2-year financial ledger documenting structured payments from Nolan's shell companies to Zandra's LLC. The evidence archive was comprehensive, irrefutable, and devastating. I watched the defense attorneys exchange glances. The mathematical certainty was settling over them. Their clients weren't facing months in minimum security facilities. They were facing decades in federal prison. One defense attorney representing Zandra placed his pen carefully on the table. "We need to consult with our clients," he said quietly. "The cooperation window closes at 1700 hours, AUSA Holt said. After that, the plea offers are withdrawn, and we proceed to trial with this evidence." She gestured at the screen still showing the surveillance footage. Zandra's face clearly visible, her voice clearly audible, her actions clearly documented. Chakchukjalkwan. "Your client signed federal documents claiming ownership of accounts flagged by FinCEN as active cartel assets." Holt continued. "That's not a negotiable fact. The only negotiable element is whether they cooperate now or face maximum sentences at trial." The defense attorneys gathered their materials and left to consult with their clients. Boyd walked over to where I stood against the wall. The prosecutor thinks all three will take cooperation deals," he said quietly. "Mercer's already started. Inez surrendered her communication logs. Zandra's holding out, but her attorney knows she has no defense." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "There's someone who wants to see you," Boyd said. 5 minutes. The transport is scheduled for 1600 hours. He led me into the corridor. 30 feet down the hallway, 2 transport officers stood flanking Zandra. She was out of the interrogation room, hands cuffed in front of her, waiting for the vehicle that would take her to federal holding. Boyd nodded to the officers. They stepped back slightly, giving us space but maintaining position. I walked toward my daughter. We stood facing each other in that institutional corridor, gray walls, fluorescent lights, the smell of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. The first time we had been face to face since my arrest. Zandra's eyes were dry and fixed on mine. "You knew," she said. Not a question, a statement. "Yes. From the beginning you knew." "From the moment the USB drive moved 2 millimeters to the left," I said. 3 months ago. I knew everything." Her jaw tightened. "The Florida retreat, the safe house, the surveillance cameras. All of it. All of it," I confirmed. "How long did you wait?" she asked. "How long did you sit there knowing what we were doing? How do you tell your daughter you spent 3 months building her cage while simultaneously writing love letters you'll never have the courage to send?" "Long enough to write you 37 letters I'll never send," I said quietly. Something flickered in her expression. Not quite understanding, not quite believing. "Letters," she repeated. "Memories." I said. "Your first day of school, your graduation, the night you passed the bar exam, all the moments before. This." Zandra looked down at her cuffed hands. "I needed to remember why I loved you." I continued, "Before I could accept what you'd become." The transport officers shifted position. Time was running short. "They're offering a cooperation deal." Zandra said, her voice barely above a whisper. 15 years if I testify against Nolan. 22 if I don't. "What will you do?" I don't know," she said. Then she looked up at me. "Did you ever love me, or was I always just a problem you were planning to solve?" The question cut deeper than any surveillance footage, any federal charge, any courtroom testimony could have. I loved you," I said. "I love you still. That's why this hurts." "You destroyed me," Zandra said. "Systematically, methodically. You destroyed all of us." "You tried to kill me," I said. "Nolan told you old men have accidents. You agreed. What did you think would happen?" She had no answer. The transport officers stepped forward. "Time's up," one of them said. Zandra and I looked at each other across 3 feet of corridor space and 30 years of history. "I'm sorry," I said. "For whatever I did that made you hate me enough to do this. I'm sorry." "Oh, I don't hate you," Zandra said. "I wanted what was mine, the estate, the money, the recognition. You were in the way." The officers took her arms gently, preparing to escort her toward the transport vehicle. "Goodbye, Dad," Zandra said. It was the first time she had called me that since the arrest. I stood in the corridor, watching the transport officers walk her toward the exit. She moved with her shoulders back, her head up, maintaining dignity despite the handcuffs and the federal charges and the surveillance footage that had captured every moment of her betrayal. At the corridor junction, she paused. The officers stopped, letting her turn back one final time. 30 feet of institutional hallway separated us. Fluorescent lights overhead. Gray walls on both sides. No words. No gesture. Just recognition of mutual destruction. She had tried to eliminate me and failed. I had countered with federal prosecution and succeeded. We had both won and both lost in equal measure. Zandra turned away and disappeared around the corner. I stood alone in the empty corridor, listening to the echo of footsteps fading into silence. Boyd's phone rang at sunset, with FBI confirmation that Royal Bahamas Police Force had arrested Nolan at his Nassau Villa. 11 wire fraud counts, documented and counting. I sat in my study while Boyd relayed the details Agent Torres had just shared. The villa overlooked Paradise Island. Nolan had been eating grilled mahi-mahi on his terrace when 4 officers arrived with an arrest warrant. He dropped his fork, tried to run toward the beach. Access made it maybe 30 feet before they tackled him into the sand. Torres says each transfer attempt generated a separate federal count. Boyd explained, reading from his notes. 11 attempts, 11 wire fraud charges. Marsden arrived 20 minutes later with the projected indictment. We gathered in the dining room where this had started 3 months ago. The room where I'd first suspected something wrong when Zandra made her comment about my age over dinner. Marsden spread the documents across the table. The counts stack: wire fraud, money laundering, RICO conspiracy. The prosecutors are considering additional charges related to the cryptocurrency conversion. They're examining whether routing stolen funds through mixing services could support material support allegations if any nodes touched sanctioned entities. Maximum exposure, I asked. Per the wire fraud statute, each count carries 20 years. 11 counts. Marsden paused. 220 years maximum. Realistically, federal sentencing guidelines will produce something closer to 15 to 25 years, depending on his cooperation level and the judge's discretion. Boyd closed his notebook. Torres mentioned Nolan tried to claim diplomatic immunity, said his cryptocurrency consulting work for a Bahamian finance ministry subcommittee entitled him to protection. The State Department rejected that within an hour, Marsden said. He's being extradited. Should arrive in federal custody within 72 hours. I looked at the indictment summary. United States of America versus Nolan Callahan. The man who had once run from federal agents in Miami and rebuilt his empire from exile, now facing the consequences of reaching back into my family one final time. The pattern interrupt landed cleanly after watching 11 federal counts stack against the man who had once tried to have me killed. The weight of what I'd engineered settled differently than I'd anticipated. "What about Zandra?" I asked. "Cooperating fully," Boyd said. She provided testimony about Nolan's planning timeline, the Cayman account setup, the cryptocurrency conversion strategy. Her attorney negotiated a plea agreement conspiracy to commit wire fraud single-count recommendation for suspended sentence plus restitution and community service. Mercer refused the plea deal, Marsden said. He's proceeding to trial. Claims he was manipulated by Nolan, that he didn't understand the legal implications of moving digital assets. The prosecutors aren't buying it. They have the encrypted messages where he researched extradition treaties and discussed jurisdictional arbitrage strategies. Inez had already pleaded guilty to elder fraud and conspiracy. Her sentencing hearing was scheduled for August. The prosecutor had recommended 8 years. We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, the same oak tree that had shaded 4 generations of Sunday dinners swayed in the evening breeze. "There's one more matter," Marsden said 3 weeks later, sliding a different folder across his desk. "The funds have been released from federal escrow." I opened the folder. Account statements. Federal release documentation. The entire $8 million recovered and verified, now sitting in a Justice Department, holding account, pending my instruction. "What are my options?" I asked. Marsden outlined the standard paths. I could reclaim the funds directly. I could distribute them to other family members. I could donate portions to existing charitable organizations. I could establish a private foundation. Or, he said, you could create something lasting. That's when the exit twist crystallized. I didn't want the money back. Didn't want it sitting in accounts my family would fight over after I died. Didn't want any reminder of what greed had done to people I'd loved. "A scholarship fund," I said. "Permanent endowment for disadvantaged students pursuing education degrees." Marsden nodded slowly. "Named the Margaret Caldwell Memorial Scholarship Foundation." I met his eyes. "Every dollar they tried to steal goes toward helping students who never knew her. Students who want to teach, who want to make education accessible, who share the values she spent 40 years demonstrating." Marsden spent the next hour outlining the structure. The fund would be administered through a community foundation. Selection committees would evaluate applications based on financial need, academic merit, and commitment to educational equity. The $8 million endowment would generate approximately $320,000 annually, enough for $32,000 scholarships or $64 $5,000 awards, depending on how we calibrated the distribution model. "The fund will operate in perpetuity," Marsden explained. "Long after everyone involved in this situation is gone, students will receive support bearing Margaret's name." I thought about Margaret reading to elementary students every Thursday for 20 years after she retired. I thought about the box of thank you letters from former students we'd found after she died. I thought about how she'd believed education could break cycles of poverty, could open doors, could transform communities. Marsden slid the scholarship trust documents across his desk for my signature. The fund would bear Margaret's name in perpetuity, transforming the $8 million my family destroyed themselves, fighting over, into educational opportunities for students who never knew her. I signed, and for the first time in 2 years, felt something other than rage. I sat in the final row of the federal courtroom in a Navy suit nobody recognized, listening to the judge pronounce sentences that would span decades. The scholarship documents had been signed 3 weeks earlier. The fund bearing Margaret's name would operate in perpetuity, transforming what my family had tried to steal into opportunities for students who'd never meet any of us. But that resolution belonged to a different timeline, one where money mattered more than people. Today belonged to the United States District Court, Eastern District of Virginia. Judge Elizabeth Brennan presided from the bench, a senior jurist in her late 60s, known throughout the district for exacting sentences in white-collar conspiracy cases. She'd reviewed the presentencing reports for 4 defendants over 6 hours. Now came the pronouncements. The defendant, Inez Caldwell, will rise. My wife stood flanked by her public defender. She'd pleaded guilty to conspiracy and material omission 4 months earlier. The prosecutor had recommended 8 years. Judge Brennan's voice carried no emotion as she delivered 12, citing aggravated role in targeting a vulnerable elder family member. The defendant, Mercer Riddle, will rise. My son-in-law stood slowly. He'd rejected the plea agreement, proceeded to trial, lost on all counts. The jury had deliberated 90 minutes. 15 years on counts 1 through 9 to run consecutively with credit for time served. Judge Brennan said. Your expertise in cybersecurity made this conspiracy possible. You weaponized professional skills against your own father. The court finds that aggravating factor warrants upward departure from guidelines. Mercer's shoulders sagged. The marshals moved closer. The defendant, Nolan Callahan, will rise. The convicted felon stood in orange detention facility clothing. He'd been extradited from Nassau in chains, denied bail as a flight risk held pending trial for 7 months. The wire fraud counts had multiplied. During discovery, 11 became 14 when prosecutors found additional cryptocurrency conversion attempts. 22 years on counts 1 through 17 to run consecutively, Judge Brennan announced. The substantive RICO violation elevates this beyond standard financial fraud. You organized, directed, and profited from a criminal enterprise targeting your own family. You fled the country. You attempted to establish permanent residence in a non-extradition jurisdiction. The guidelines are clear, and this court will follow them. Nolan closed his eyes. 22 years meant he'd be 51 at release, assuming good behavior, and federal sentencing reforms held. The defendant, Zandra Caldwell, will rise. My daughter stood in a gray suit I recognized from her law firm days. She'd cooperated with prosecutors after Nolan's arrest, provided testimony, pleaded guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy. Her attorney had argued for mercy based on cooperation level and acceptance of responsibility. Judge Brennan looked directly at her. 18 years on counts 1 through 7 to run consecutively with credit for time served. Zandra's attorney started to object. Reconsidered, remained silent. The violation of your oath as an officer of this court represents a profound betrayal of public trust. Judge Brennan continued. You held a license to practice law. You understood fiduciary duty, criminal statutes, ethical obligations. You chose to apply that expertise toward defrauding your father of $8 million. The court finds that aggravating factor warrants significant upward enhancement beyond standard guidelines. The gavel fell with a sound like a door closing. This court is adjourned. Marshals approached the defense tables. Zandra turned briefly toward the gallery, not looking for me, just looking, then allowed herself to be led through the side door toward the detention facility transport bay. She disappeared without looking back. I remained seated while the courtroom cleared. Prosecutors gathered files. Defense attorneys consoled family members I didn't recognize. Inez's sister, Mercer's college roommate, people who'd become supporting characters in a story I'd engineered from the beginning. Walking from the courthouse into December cold, I realized I'd spent 2 years engineering perfect revenge and achieved complete legal victory, yet felt only profound loss where family once existed. The drive to the Blue Ridge Mountains took 4 hours. I'd purchased the cabin 6 months earlier, 800 square feet log construction, 15 acres of privacy. No neighbors within 2 miles. No family photographs on the walls. No Margaret. Christmas morning arrived with frost coating the porch railings and silence that felt like presence. I sat in the wooden rocking chair Margaret had insisted we buy 30 years ago, holding black coffee that tasted like charcoal, watching a small cigar burn in the ashtray beside me. The bound notebook rested on the side table where I'd left it the night before. 37 letters composed during the Safe House vigil while Boyd had monitored digital traffic and Marsden had filed federal motions. Letters I'd written to Zandra when I couldn't sleep, when rage transformed temporarily into something that resembled grief. I read the pages a final time. Some were angry. Some were confused. Several asked questions I'd never get answered. A few remembered moments before money destroyed us, teaching her to sail when she was 9, attending her law school graduation, dancing with her at her wedding to a man who'd left her 3 years later. The heavy envelope sat sealed on my lap, addressed to the Federal Correctional Facility, where Zandra had begun her term. Medium security, Pennsylvania. Visitation allowed with advance approval and background clearance. I had no expectation she'd reply, no certainty she'd even read them. But I refused to be the person who stopped offering love to his child regardless of her actions. What does it mean to love someone who tried to destroy you, to choose connection over estrangement, when estrangement would be justified, even rational? Margaret would have known the answer. She'd forgiven students who plagiarized, parents who blamed her for their children's failures, administrators who cut her budget every year. She'd believed people were more than their worst decisions. You don't stop being a father because your daughter committed federal crimes, I said to the mountains, my voice rough from the cigar smoke. You don't stop offering love because it wasn't returned. Margaret understood that. She'd approve of these letters if nothing else. I walked the quarter-mile to the rural mailbox at the end of the gravel drive. My boots crunched through ice-crusted snow. My breath formed clouds in air that smelled like pine and wood smoke from a distant chimney. The envelope disappeared into the mailbox with a metallic click. I stood in Christmas morning silence, Blue Ridge Mountains stretching behind me, Margaret's scholarship, ensuring her legacy, Xandra's letters ensuring my humanity. Perfect revenge achieved everything except what mattered most, but perhaps imperfect love offered without expectation might salvage something from the ruins. And to you listening to my story, remember this: family justice isn't always about winning. I spent 2 years engineering the perfect trap. I documented every lie, tracked every transaction, orchestrated federal arrests. I achieved complete legal victory. My daughter got 18 years. But sitting alone in that courtroom, watching them led away in handcuffs, I realized revenge without redemption is just another kind of loss. Don't make my mistake of thinking justice alone heals betrayal. These dad's revenge stories you hear on Wise Revenge share one truth. Family justice means choosing what you can live with after the anger fades. I could have walked away bitter, let betrayal define my final years. Instead, I honored Margaret's memory with a scholarship fund and mailed an envelope with 37 letters to my imprisoned daughter. I believe God put me through this not just to deliver consequences, but to teach me unconditional love doesn't require reconciliation. It requires choosing humanity over hatred. That's the real lesson in Dad's revenge stories. What would you have done in my position? Drop a comment and tell me, would you have mailed those letters? Or would you have let the family justice speak for itself? If this story resonated with you, please share it. And if you want more Dad's revenge stories that explore real consequences and redemption, subscribe to Wise Revenge. Thank you for staying until the very end. I read every comment you leave. One final reminder: certain details in this story have been fictionalized for reflection and storytelling. What I hope stays with you is the message, not the specifics. God bless you.